So everybody knows there was an attempted insurrection, an attempted coup, a diet coup, a riot, however you want to refer to it. I don't really care. You use whatever term you want to use. And we've now had enough time where we could look back on it and digest the entire way that it unfolded, right? So to run through it real quick, you had this rally, this event, this protest that was supposed to happen in Washington, D.C. President Trump and his sons went and gave speeches at this rally, and Trump was basically saying, we have to be strong, we have to be strong, we can't be weak in moments like this, and we have to hold people accountable. It was a fraudulent election, it was a rigged election, and let's go to the Capitol. And so, very clearly sort of egging these people on, right? He didn't say at any point, like, go break in and threaten physical violence or whatever. He didn't say that, but he did egg them on to, like, go to the Capitol. He has been egging them on in terms of screaming fraudulent election nonstop. Then, of course, they went to the Capitol, and all mayhem broke loose. And you had some cops who were literally in on it and, like, allowing the protesters through to be on the property. Some cops who were not in on it, at least 5 or 6 people died, at least 50 injuries. There were some people with guns. There were threatening to hang Mike Pence because they viewed Pence as turning on Trump. It was absolutely terrible. So, what Trump did when it was very clear that things had gotten out of hand is he took to Twitter, and yet again, he spoke out of both sides of his mouth. And so his commentary on Twitter was like, the police officers, we must protect our police officers, we support our boys in blue, and we must continue to support our boys in blue, and make sure we do the right thing and we take care of them. And also, this election was totally fraudulent and totally rigged and terrible, and maybe somebody should do something about it. I don't know if it should stand. Terrible, fraudulent election, rigged election, it was taken from us, it was taken from us. So, again, both messages there at the same time. Fraudulent election, fraudulent election, fraudulent election. Somebody should do something about it. But also, hey, be peaceful. Don't hurt our boys in blue, because there were reports that the cops were, the victims of attacks at that time. So he did that a number of times. And the rest of the event unfolded as it unfolded. Eventually, it was brought under control. The next day, Trump comes out and he basically gives a speech throwing his supporters under the bus, the people who were at the attempted insurrection, the diet coup, as I call it. He basically threw them under the bus and said, yeah, I will I'll concede and there will be a peaceful transition of power. So what the hell are we supposed to do now? Because the media was reacting in a somewhat reasonable way where they were like, well, there can't just be no consequences for this. The Democrats are trying to grapple with, well, what the hell do we do specifically? The initial conversation was about the 25th Amendment, that if Mike Pence, the vice president, and a number of the staffers agree to do the 25th Amendment, you could just get Trump out of office pretty much immediately. Like, he would no longer be president immediately. And there was talk that maybe Pence would do it because the Trump supporters were talking about hanging Pence, and Trump had turned on Pence and threw him under the bus after Pence had been loyal his entire term. Nobody's been more loyal to Trump than Pence, and Trump still threw Pence under the bus because Pence didn't go out there and say, I'm objecting to the results of this election even though I have no power to overturn it. So there was a chance, I thought, hey, maybe there's a chance here that they do the 25th Amendment because Pence feels slighted, and Trump really is a danger right now. So maybe they'll do that. Well, now there's conflicting reports. I think that if they were going to do the 25th Amendment, they would have already done it by now, and they didn't do it yet. So I don't think they're going to do the 25th Amendment, even though there's been chatter about how Pence has gone back and forth on whether or not to do that. Well, then the next thing people are bringing up is, well, we should do impeachment. Because, again, there needs to be some consequences for Trump effectively egging on these people who are trying to do an insurrection. Now, I think there are a number of issues with that. First of all, this is just a minor point, but I still think it's relevant to bring up in the context of the story. I don't think they'll get near the numbers that they would need to do it. Again, if it's the right thing in principle to do it, then it doesn't matter that you can't get the right number of people. You should do it as a matter of principle. But they want to try that. But then there's another problem of, like, even if you get it done, he's only in office for 10 more days now? So, like, what are you going to do? Get him out like a day early, maybe? Or would it be like, would you even get the conclusion of it like after he's already out of office, which just seems almost like a total waste of time and just like a virtue signaling exercise. But more importantly, I actually think that on the merits, it's a much more complex picture than people are giving it credit for on the merits of impeachment. Now, again, I'll get to what the consequences should be for what Trump did in a second, but I don't know why people are pretending like Trump didn't give himself wiggle room and speak out of both sides of his mouth. Of course he did. It's classic Trump, you know? Like, in the minds of a lot of Democrats who are like, let's do impeachment, they're making it seem like Trump went out there and said, storm the Capitol, try to hang Mike Pence, try to kill everybody who's not on our side on this. And he didn't do that. He spoke out of both sides of his mouth. He gave himself wiggle room. He would say, be peaceful, you know, don't hurt the cops. The cops are amazing. The cops are wonderful. And also, isn't this election so fraudulent and so rigged? And by the way, he also was very careful never to say, it's a fraudulent and rigged election, and therefore, here's what I want you to do. He would just say fraudulent, rigged election, and basically let people fill in the blank who are his own supporters with like, I know what he wants me to do. He wants me to go raise hell and go kill elected officials. Trump never said, fraudulent election, now go kill the officials. He just said fraudulent election, fraudulent election, fraudulent election, and egged them on like with little nudges. So in terms of the actual substance of what he was saying, he left himself enough wiggle room where on the merits of impeachment, it's up in the air. It's not an open and shut case. Now, having said all that, okay, because I know a lot of people are listening now and pulling out their hair and saying, oh my God, Kyle's going so weak on Trump. Wrong. Because I have the solution, and the solution didn't come from me. I saw, it's a great article in The Nation. So let me show you, and then I'll explain why this makes the most sense. Bar Trump from ever holding office again. On Friday, when House Democrats discussed responses to Trump's incitement of insurrection, there was some discussion of a 14th Amendment strategy for barring Trump from holding office in the future. Section 3 of the amendment declares, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. That's the crucial part. Section 5 of the amendment, which was enacted after the Civil War, Section 5 of the amendment, which was enacted after the Civil War with an eye toward preventing supporters of the Confederacy from returning to power, vests Congress with the authority to adopt appropriate legislation to enforce the other parts of the amendment. Okay, so, in layman's terms, here's what that means. If you partake in an insurrection or rebellion, or give aid or comfort to the people who are doing it, well then, there's a 14th Amendment remedy to just, with a simple majority, to ban you from ever holding elected office ever again. This is literally like the perfect scenario. This is the perfect solution. Because I don't think there's a question. I think there is a question as to whether or not there was direct incitement and direct threats of violence from Trump. I think that's an open question. By the letter of what he said, there wasn't. But by the spirit of what he said, yes, there was. Clearly, the spirit of it was, I will do anything by any means necessary to stay in power, okay? But in terms of the letter of what he was saying, no, there was enough ambiguity, and he spoke out of both sides of his mouth. So, that means we need some kind of recourse, which is, number one, doesn't require the incredibly high numbers that you need for impeachment, where you need to get like 16 Republicans in the Senate. But number two, also is a punishment that fits the crime. So yes, Trump was being ambiguous, and Trump was speaking out of both sides of his mouth, but you cannot make a case to me that he wasn't giving aid or comfort to people who were trying to do an insurrection, because I think that's exactly what he was doing, which is why, you know, in one of the addresses, he said, you're very special people. All of you are very special people. Okay, that alone is enough for me. People who are actively, in their minds, they really think they're going to overthrow the U.S. government and help Trump, and they're like awaiting further orders from Trump. So Trump sending messages to these people, first of all, egging them to go to the Capitol in the first place, talking about fraudulent election, rigged election, fraudulent election, rigged election, and then he calls them very special people as they're doing it? No, I think he's very clearly giving aid and comfort to people who are trying to do an insurrection, to people who are trying to do a rebellion. So I think that's an open and shut case, but also all you need is a simple majority in the House and the Senate. You can get a simple majority in the House and the Senate. You can do it. You have the numbers for a simple majority. And if you pass, it's a regular legislative political move. It's a political process. So if you can get the majority in the House, you'll easily get it. If you can get the majority in the Senate, you'll probably get it. You just have to hold Manchin, right? Well, then Trump can never hold elected office ever again. And the nightmare's over. That as soon as Trump is gone in 10 days, he's not going to hold elected office ever again. I think this is the appropriate punishment. I do think he was ambiguous enough, and he spoke out of both sides of his mouth enough where he gave himself enough cover so that he would say, I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't an impeachable offense. I told them to be peaceful. I told them to, be good to the cops. I turned on them immediately the day after when I gave a speech and threw them under the bus. I don't know what you guys are talking about. This isn't impeachment worthy. What are you talking about? He's got enough wiggle room on that. Where he definitely doesn't have enough wiggle room is this 14th Amendment way to address the problem. Where it is clear to me he was giving aid and comfort to people who were trying to do an insurrection, even though there was no chance of it succeeding, even though these people are, it's like as one of the tweet said, the Duck Dynasty guys and a guy in a Chewbacca bikini. So they're a mess. It had no chance of succeeding. It was sort of a joke, but also people are dead. They had the intentionality of overthrowing the government in an authoritarian fashion to give it over to Trump. And Trump the entire time was, at the very least, egging them on, nudging them, winking, So that's enough for me to say, under the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, you gave aid and comfort to people doing an insurrection or a rebellion, so you're never allowed to hold public office ever again. And again, all it takes is a simple majority in the House and the Senate. This is the solution, and these are the consequences. There should not be no consequences for what Trump did. Because what Trump did, the spirit of what he was doing was clear. Nudging these people on, giving a wink and a nod, fraudulent election, rigged election, all based on lies. He's lying. He's lying for his authoritarian ends. So how do we address that? Do we have nothing? So there's no trial. There's no breaking the law. There's no trial. So he doesn't end up in prison. There's no impeachment. You're not going to get the proper numbers, and there's enough ambiguity where it wouldn't get through. So what are you going to do? Nothing? No, this is what you do. And it actually can work. And it's a punishment that fits the crime. So that's how you go after Trump for what he did here. You use the 14th Amendment. You bar him from future holding of public office because he did give aid and comfort to those trying to do an insurrection or a rebellion. So this is the approach I think makes the most sense. It also, by the way, doesn't suck all the air up out of the room, too. Where now the only thing we're talking about is what happened then, and we're no longer talking about healthcare in the middle of a pandemic or wages in the middle of effectively a depression. You don't want to suck up all the air out of the room with still the last few days of Trump's time in office, nothing but Trump bad virtue signaling. We want to get back to the business of legislating for the people, and the way you can still give consequences for Trump's actions, but also get back to the business of legislating for the people is to take this approach, because it could pass. It could pass. It has a chance of success. It ends our national nightmare, and it's a punishment that fits the crime. So that's what I'm advocating everybody does. This is what I'm advocating all the Democrats are in favor of. And if they were to do this, it would be historic too. I don't know if this has ever been used previously on any other president, but to me, this looks like an open and shut case in terms of doing it for Trump. So listen, back away from the 25th Amendment stuff, the impeachment stuff. Let's focus on this because it makes sense and it can work. And it would end our national nightmare. So let's do it, man. I'm all in on this approach.